Hello, I'm John Grom, and welcome to the 56th Right and Left Discussion Forum. The purpose of our discussion forum is to demonstrate that civility is not only possible in discussing contentious topics, but it is necessary if common ground is to be found. Today's topic, Learning from Our Adversaries, asks the question if we can learn anything of value from those who have already decided to hold opinions and beliefs that are based on faulty thinking, inaccurate data, or are just plain wrong. Today's panel, beginning on my left, is Bryan Laubaugh, President of R&B Financial Services. On his left is Dr. Natalie Sydorenko, writer, educator, and consultant in the field of communications. On her left is Patty Haskins, retired math teacher and current member of the Wadsworth City Council. On her left is Tom Finley, partner with Great Lakes Resource Center and conqueror of Mount Kilimanjaro. Bryan, as you know, it's very difficult to acknowledge that someone who holds a belief that we totally reject as anything at all of value to share with us. For instance, as a committed free market capitalist, and I'm assuming that you are, could you listen with a completely open mind to someone who is an anti-capitalist and a decidedly left-wing socialist?
Well, that's a very good question. I think I would be willing to listen if the other party was willing to listen to me as well. If there was a dialogue, and that's really what's missing today, is the dialogue that at the end of the day, maybe you agree to disagree. We've gone to the extremes on each side. It's been very polarized. And I think we really need to come to the middle. Compromise really isn't that bad. There's certain things each individual could accept. But when you harden your position, when you harden your views, and you start attaching labels to people when they don't believe in your views, then I think you do the dialogue more damage. So yeah, I think I could. Proof of that is I sit here. I have no ill feelings against anyone here on the panel. I like, Patty and Natalie. I might not agree with them, but there's no animus.
The question is, do you have an open mind when they're talking?
Yeah, I do. I listen. I really do. I listen to what they're saying, and if it makes sense to me, I think I'm willing to
change your mind?
Change my mind on certain things. Now,
have you ever done it?
Sure I have. Oh yeah. I have been listening and watching. I don't know, have you watched Democracy Now? It comes on at about 5:30, and that's the time I work out up here at the Y. And it's obviously the left-wing version of, I can't call it Fox News or anything, but it's their views on the world and their opinions. And some of it makes sense. Others, when they take that and they run it to the extreme, that's when I have to back off. So, I'm open to change. I don't think I'm that hard on certain things, but I do know that certain things just don't work. And there's enough anecdotal proof out there that says that this particular thing just does not work. And so, why do we need to continue to beat that?
I don't suppose you want to give an example.
Well, as far as how I'm changing?
No, on what things don't work.
I think there are certain things that the left has made their mantra that just don't work. I think the current state of the welfare state just does not work. It's not sustainable, and that needs to change, and they need to back off that. I think the notion that somehow everyone has some sort of victimhood. I just don't believe that. I don't believe that my grandparents and great-grandparents that came to this country viewed themselves as being victims. They viewed America as a land of opportunity, and I think that's obviously been the hard left's view, is that America really isn't that great. And I think they need to back off of that. So those are just a few things, and I'm willing to listen. And I'm certain that others here will have different opinions.
And Natalie's dying to tell you.
She's chomping at the bit.
Fire away, Natalie.
Okay. Well, I'll start off with responding to what Bryan just said, because I think his earlier points are excellent, and it is what I want to build on. But I'll say that I agree with Bryan that there are some things that even if you are listening with an open mind, you're not going to change your view on because you just don't believe they're going to work. So his example of the welfare state, and point well taken, I also think it's completely broken, even though I would be considered on the left compared to Bryan on the right. I feel the same way about trickle-down economics. There's absolutely no studies or statistics that have demonstrated that trickle-down economics work, and that the money held by the 1% is going to find its way down to the lowest economic
Let me just
sectors.
make an interjection. I don't like to do that normally when we're on the first round of our discussion
Okay.
here, but what do you think about the Reagan years? We had the longest economic expansion in history.
But that led to a lot of problems that then Clinton had to clean up to create the surplus that we saw in our overall system in America. So I'm still going to reject it, John. But it's okay, because we have different opinions here. That's what civility is, right? But what I liked about what Bryan said in the beginning is, he said there's an absence of dialogue. And this is the problem that I see going forward with younger generations. They have no example of dialogue. There is no one in politics on the left and the right when they come together, or in the media on the left and the right when they come together, that listens to understand. They listen to respond, because the response is what gets them ratings, it keeps everything contentious, and they're not really listening to each other to be moved or changed or open-minded. They're listening to get more ratings and to respond in the way that they feel is the most controversial that they can possibly do. So I feel like most people do not listen to understand. We listen to respond. That's human nature. We are defensive of our position. We want to do that, but that's not going to encourage civility. We really have to try to listen with an open mind. I also feel that the older you get, the more that your attitudes, beliefs, and values are ingrained, the more that you have certain perspectives of what the word rational means. I noted in your note, what if your opponent is giving you a rational argument? That is still subjective. For you to believe that that's a rational argument is subjective, right? I have been involved with a colleague who's been tracking ISIS bloggers, and in their minds, they're completely rational. If I talked with a young ISIS militant who was trying to explain to me why the ISIS state needed to take over the Middle East and why America is wrong and why it's okay to kill children, there's no way their argument will ever be rational to me, regardless of how civil I was trying to be. So I think there are parameters on how far civility can go with regards to rationality.
Patty, you've got a thoughtful look on your face.
Oh, that's good. I agree with everything that Bryan and Natalie have stated. I mean, obviously the first thing that I think you need to do is to listen to your adversaries and have that ability to listen and the willingness to listen. Too often I watch news telecasts and a particular person is giving a viewpoint and the commentator is, when they do a split screen, is sitting there reading his notes about what he can say next and how he's going to attack that person, as opposed to actually listening to that person and seeing if they have a good argument or if they have facts that they can agree with or not agree with. But you have to listen to begin with. The second thing, and I think this is just as important, is you not only have to listen, but you have to be open to change and open to the idea that you will change your viewpoint on a particular issue. I mean, I find myself guilty of this too many times. I will listen intently, but not be willing to change or acknowledge that that adversary has made a good point, and maybe I need to rethink what I believe in. Now, I agree with Natalie that there are parameters. There are things that I would never, in my lifetime, I could agree with, because I'm not sure that I could see a rational reason for having that. You know, someone just as out of the blue, someone came up to me and said, "I think we should re-invoke slavery." I'm sure there are arguments to be made. I can't imagine one that's rational or reasonable. So I can't imagine myself ever agreeing with that. But
You must not read the Bible.
actually, I do, but that's beside the point.
I'm making light of something that's serious here.
Yeah, no, that's true. It's in the Bible.
Yeah.
But when you listen to people and you're not willing to modify your opinion because they have made a rational, logical point, or at least, at the very least, investigate what they have stated. Maybe this all goes back to the fact that too many times we think that our opinions are right. And perhaps there's a little bit of egotism there, that we feel we know more than everybody else. And we have to admit to ourselves, hey, I'm not the smartest person in the world. I don't know everything. And I can learn if I listen to other people and acknowledge that they are intelligent, that they may have good facts, and then possibly we can, modify to get opinions. I mean, if you look in history and politics, the only way things have ever been accomplished in this country has been by both sides coming together for a solution that all can agree with. It may not give everything the left wants, it may not give everything the right wants, but it tends to solve a problem that might exist and at least start the dialogue and begin a finding of a solution to a problem that cannot be done unilaterally.
I think lately we've come to see compromise as sacrificing principles.
Oh, exactly. Or the other thing is, too, that too many people are afraid if they change their opinion, they'll be called a flip-flopper. I
Yeah.
mean, how many times have we heard that term used in a negative manner?
Right. And not just the flip-flopper, but when you shift your paradigm or you're open to someone else's worldview, now everything in your world is being questioned, and people fear that.
Yeah.
They don't want to be challenged because, oh my goodness, I might have to change. I might have to call all these other things into question, and that is scary to people. People resist that kind of change.
The whole rhino
Yeah.
controversy.
Yes.
Well,
Yeah.
Patty, you may
Yes.
not be the smartest person in the world, but you're sitting next to him.
Just ask me.
Fire away, Tom.
Learning from our adversaries requires a habit, a willingness within yourself to establish that, and that is learning without establishing conditions. So, Patty, what you just said about the only way anything ever happened is everyone agreeing or whatever, and I don't think so. It's the competitor wins and makes it then happen. And that gets me to something you said, Natalie, and that is this business of I think you said human nature. If that means culture, our culture exists around competition and winning, and if that factor is not recognized, that when you're looking at an adversary here, it's a competitive situation, and we just thrive on competition. How we manage it now is the habits we establish around it, and I think that barrier can get in the road of a strategy we all know to be true, and Covey popularized it with seek first to understand. But my gosh, that there are so many obstacles into that, and not the least of which, when we're talking culture, is what we have abandoned in teaching our children, both in churches and in schools and wherever. If you remember, well, maybe not, maybe it goes back, I don't know when it started disappearing, but we used to have citizenship on the report card.
Oh, yeah.
Remember that? Well, it's not there today. Maybe if it is, it's very watered down. But what was citizenship? It was civility. Seeking first to understand, to get along and with. So one thing that is counter in terms of our culture or human nature, if you will, and this competitiveness, when you talk about compromise, compromise as a conflict resolution is a lose-lose. So it never, in its best form, is a good way. Oddly enough, that's what our government works around, is compromises, so we can move forward. So we get all kind of things stuffed in bills and that sort of thing. Just compromise.
I disagree with you that compromise is a lose-lose. I think compromise can be a win-win. What about in a marriage? This person wants to do this thing, this person wants to do this thing. Should it be this person gets their way or this person does, or why can't they come to a consensus where both people will be able to benefit out of the third option that's a compromise?
That's collaboration. That's not compromise. Compromise loses. You surrender something. Collaboration.
Is that okay to surrender something, though? Isn't that good for our ego, good for our spirit, when we learn that we don't always have to win and get our way when we can surrender?
When you accept that, you've moved to collaboration, not compromise.
I'm going to disagree with the way you're using the terms, but I appreciate the argument.
Just look at it, Natalie, as the whole business of competition, or better yet, of conflict. And how do you resolve conflict? Compromise is okay, it's a way, otherwise you might kill one another or whatever, but it is legitimate. Just recognize that you never, when in a compromise, you have not committed.
See, we teach that. I teach that differently in communication.
Yeah, well,
I teach it completely differently, that compromise is the win-win versus the...
Maybe collaboration.
Collaboration
working
is,
together to
right.
get to that. And maybe it's a matter of the wrong word.
Yeah, it's just, we're semantics. It's just
Yeah,
semantics,
yeah,
the way we're using
yeah.
the terms.
But when you have an issue, of a political nature in Congress, and the left digs in their heels, which is what's happening now, the right digs in their heels, nothing gets done because no one is willing to compromise.
Or collaborate.
Or
collaborate.
Or collaborate. But by nature of this side's either going to give into this side or this side's going to give into this side. If you each take the best parts of each idea and put them together, now whether you call that compromise or collaboration, that is when things happen. Digging in your heels and butting heads, does nothing for anyone.
To think of Congress as being a battle of principles, I think, is wrong. Politicians do what they think their voters want them to do, and that I don't know that a compromise in a political situation is actually yielding a principle to somebody else's stronger principle. I have a lot of trouble with that. I think that it comes down to the grassroots, us, the public square. For us to try to agree with each other, to compromise, collaborate, or whatever. But first we have to begin to understand why it is that we believe what we believe. I think that, Bryan mentioned the war on poverty, which has spent untold trillions of dollars by this point, and we still have a poverty rate around 15%, which is essentially what it was in the early 70s. It hasn't really changed. Nothing has been modified, and we all know that we've got that problem. Politicians are afraid to touch it, though. It's like Social Security. They're afraid that whatever they do, they're going to lose votes. But the reasons that people attach themselves to certain beliefs have to do with a lot more than do we think that this program is going to bring more people out of poverty. I think that there's an awful lot of ego, self-image. People love to stake themselves to an idea and then put the bumper sticker on their car to let the whole world know what they agree with or disagree with, whether it's gun control or something else. So sometimes I get led to believe that people adopt opinions for how they think it makes them look or how it makes them feel in their peer group.
For some, yes.
Well,
For social inclusion purposes is really what you're talking about.
yeah, absolutely. That's
And I think that depends on the topic. I think a lot of people go with their peers for social inclusion, but I think Tom's right in the fact that there sometimes will be a loser and a winner because there isn't a way to compromise. Like the topics that we're talking about, Some of them are mutable. Some aren't. For instance, and I don't want to get into this topic. I'm just using it as an example. If you are pro-choice and if you are pro-life, there's not really a middle ground. Do you understand what I'm saying? There's no
sure.
middle ground there. So you're on one side or the other. There isn't a compromisable option in that.
People keep working at it, though.
Right. But at the end of the day,
You know,
abortion's either legal or illegal.
how many weeks of gestation was it?
Right.
Rape or incest?
But it comes down to more of that conviction and that
Yeah.
value of what you believe. And some topics in the world, as civil as you try to be and as open-minded as you try to be, if that's your spiritual or your human or your emotional belief and conviction, it's not going to be swayed just from dialogue. It doesn't mean you have to attack the other person or be mean, but you can't really hope to change them. And even my students who were nothing like me, I would ask them to not be changed into what I believe, but to assert what they believe with as much evidence as they possibly could. And that's why actually my students that fared the best in argumentation classes were always students who were opposite of my beliefs, because they couldn't believe that I would encourage them to keep believing what they believe. Just make sure you argue it as clear and succinctly as possible. And I learned from them and they learned from me, and we were both changed
I would love to have been in your
because of
class.
that. I would have loved to have you, John.
You can still go back.
You can always come back to school.
There's a lot of non-traditional
That's true.
students at the University of
That's
Akron.
true.
I'm sure you could.
You're calling me non-traditional?
I'm just saying I'm non-traditional.
Absolutely.
Well, learning from our adversaries is what we're describing here, and we are getting common ground in terms of an openness, a listening. Those are two key words we're all agreeing upon. And of course, when they become habit, we have knocked down those conditions that we make exceptions to, or that interferes with us being just a natural position. So when someone says something I disagree, I don't close down and start looking from this standpoint. I do employ the strategy. Well, wait a minute, help me understand that, because I'm not comfortable. It is a powerful way, segue into this whole business of learning from.
It gets tremendously complicated. We discussed it once before. Charles Krauthammer, who was a conservative commentator and syndicated columnist, he said that in order to really understand American politics, you have to understand that liberals think that conservatives are evil, and conservatives think liberals are stupid. And to reduce it to something very personal like that begins to make compromise or collaboration very difficult. If I think you're just plain evil, you know, or you think I am, or stupid, or something, it's really hard for you to pay much attention to anything that I have to say. And that when you look at the kinds of comments that are on social media, or articles written by op-ed people, they reduce it to a personal level so often. There's such angry insults and name-calling going on.
And I think that's, you know, we go back to what I originally said. When we get to that point where we have to, in the argument or the debate, where the only way we feel that we won is to label that individual.
And then that's verbal aggression. That's not argumentation. True argumentation sets parameters where you have to attack the issue that the person is talking about, not the person.
Right.
Once you get into character and competence attacks, that's verbal aggression. That's no longer argumentation and debate.
You know, and John, you mentioned social media. You know, we see the most outlandish comments there, and the unwillingness, because it's nameless, and people, you know, people are not putting their face out there, their name out there with that opinion, where they can have a discussion. They make random comments that are anonymous and do it in many cases, I think, just for the hype factor.
And reaction.
Yeah,
But
unfortunately.
we take certain liberties with labeling people.
Oh, yeah.
When I think about it, people unashamedly say things like Republicans have a war on women, or Democrats have a war on the unborn.
Christmas.
When you do that, you're standing in the way of civility. When you label a whole class of people, the definition of racism that's been accepted by a lot of groups and organizations since the early 70s says that all white people are racist and they can't help it because they enjoy white privilege and power. And therefore,
it's in our DNA, which was just recently. I just found that out, that it's in our DNA that we just cannot, and I reject that. I mean,
You said definition where,
pardon me?
the definition of racism from where?
It actually started with Stokely Carmichael in 1972 when they disregarded the definition of racism as being a deliberate discrimination against people of other races based on a feeling of inferiority or whatever, and then moved it on. And it's been adopted, in fact, by our church. We have an office in our church is headquartered in Indianapolis, and we have an office it's called Anti-Racism and Pro-Reconciliation, and they accept the definition that all whites are racist. It's in their written material.
I have never heard that.
Yeah.
Nor have I. I'll have to look that up.
Yeah, you will. You don't trust me.
I don't know, John. I trust you
I
this
just
far,
told you.
but I
She
have to
wants to
investigate it
verify.
further. Yes, I have
That's
to
right.
verify
That's
that
the
evidence.
Reagan principle.
I have
have
to
a
verify
question.
that evidence,
Verify.
right.
Yeah,
I have a
yeah,
question.
Trust but
Sure.
verify.
John, an adversary has not been defined. Is that someone which we are in conflict with in terms of our views?
Someone who disagrees.
Was that conflict?
I don't know if it necessarily means conflict or not. We can disagree with each other and not be in conflict. I think Natalie is totally wrong on so many issues, but I love her anyway.
Yeah, well, but
Does that make us adversaries? I think
Yeah.
the question is really important. Are we
It-
really adversaries, or do we just disagree on things? An adversary is a loaded term, which really means
it is.
that person is against you and you're working against each other.
It is against. The very definition, I think, implies that
Adverse,
we're
right.
adverse. And therefore, it's conflict, and I'm going to circle back.
Well, we can pick the fly
No,
specks out of the pepper all day long.
well,
on
no,
that
wait
one,
a
but
minute, John. Let me go where I'm going to go.
Well, we got 1 second left.
time.
You just
Okay.
used it up. And you know what? I was going to end with a quote, but Natalie already gave it. That we listen not to learn, but to prepare a reply. And that was put on Facebook by my friend from church, Sue Ponting. All right. Anyway, thank you very much.
Thank you.